Number 7. Janelle Garrick. In December of 2019, a sheriff's deputy from Jefferson County, Wisconsin, was charged with felony burglary. The charge against Janelle Garrick led to the prompt termination of her employment. Her criminal activity was said to have taken place from February of 2018 to June of the following year. While she was off duty, Garrick read the online obituaries of people who'd recently passed away and knew that the surviving family members would be attending their funerals. She then proceeded to burglarize their homes. If confronted, Garrick would claim that she was there to follow through on a Facebook Marketplace transaction and that she'd gotten the addresses mixed up. At one point, she'd actually left a note about said false transaction on the door of a home she'd targeted. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory subsequently found her fingerprints on it. In another incriminating incident, a family returned from a funeral early to find Garrick inside their residence. She claimed to have been hired through Facebook to clean the house and also mentioned that she worked for the sheriff's department, without specifying which one. The police believe she'd been involved in at least 7 such incidents, and she ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 counts of burglary and 1 count of attempted burglary. In January of 2021, she was sentenced to 2 years initial confinement, followed by 3 years of extended supervision. Number 6. Zachary Wester. In July of 2019, Jackson County Deputy Zachary Wester was arrested by the authorities in his native Florida on charges of planting drugs inside the cars of motorists during minor traffic stops. While conducting a search of their vehicles, Wester would covertly plant methamphetamine and other drugs. He turned off his camera at key moments and manipulated the recordings in such a way that his nefarious activity was concealed. He then made the arrest based on the fabricated findings. There were dozens of cases in which Wester's disturbing actions had led to people being wrongfully charged. Many were victimized by the deputy between 2017 and 2018. The consequences, as reflected by the case of a man named Benjamin Bolin, were dire. He'd been released from prison on a DUI conviction, and Florida's welfare agency had recently granted him custody of his daughter. Bolin was on his way to buy diapers when he was stopped by Wester, who planted methamphetamine in his car. As a result of the false arrest and ensuing charge, Bolin lost custody of his daughter. Teresa Odom, another of Wester's victims, would subsequently claim that he deprived her of the credibility she had as a mother and grandmother. Odom missed about 1.5 years of the time she could have spent with her grandbaby, as she powerlessly struggled to clear her name. The sheriff's office requested an investigation into Wester in 2018. A team of crime analysts and special agents put in over 1,400 working hours as they combed through extensive body cam and dash cam footage before a pattern emerged. Upon the deputy's arrest, officers searched his vehicle and found an unmarked evidence bag containing 42 pieces of drug paraphernalia, 10 baggies of meth, and 10 baggies of marijuana. He was booked on multiple charges of racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, and false imprisonment, 19 of which he would be found guilty. At 28-year-old Wester's trial, the prosecutor described his behavior as an egregious breach of public trust and also spoke about the responsibility that comes with the powers that authorities are granted. In July of 2021, Wester was sentenced to 12 years, 8 months, and 6 days in the Florida Department of Corrections. In the wake of his arrest and trial, prosecutors dropped charges in nearly 120 cases that occurred from 2016 to 2018. In doing so, once again underlining the extent of the damage caused by the deputy. Number 5. Victoria Ann Cheek. In February of 2021, Marlborough County Sheriff's Deputy Victoria Ann Cheek was taken to the Florence County Detention Center in South Carolina after being charged with DUI. Officers arrived to a bar in Florence shortly after 1 a.m. to reports of a fight and saw 28-year-old Cheek back up and crash into 2 parked vehicles. She didn't appear to have been involved in the confrontation. Officers approached her and she agreed to take several field sobriety tests. The detention center's records indicated that she was booked at around 3:20 a.m., a few hours after she'd plowed her vehicle into the cars. Cheek has since been released on a $1,000 bond, but official reports didn't mention how the incident would affect her job as a deputy. Number 4. Shauna Bishop. A California woman who'd previously worked as a deputy was sentenced to 1 year in prison in September of 2020 after pleading guilty to having unlawful relations with a minor. The charges stemmed from the events of April 2019. Bishop, a deputy for the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, had recently ended a relationship with a co-worker. The man, whose name wasn't released, told his ex-wife that he wasn't comfortable with the way Bishop, a woman in her mid-40s, was behaving around their son, aged 16. Nevertheless, the two women had become friends, and as an enforcer of the law, Bishop was asked to come and speak to the teenager about his drinking and marijuana use. She was even invited to spend the night at their home on April the 28th. That night, after the mother had fallen asleep, Bishop went to the teen's room and engaged in intercourse with him. The legal age for consent in California is 18. In the aftermath, the boy told his sister about the incident, and she spoke to her mother, who then alerted Folsom authorities. In May of 2019, the investigation began and Bishop was placed on administrative leave. She resigned shortly thereafter. Both Bishop and the boy's mother had taken Ambien before bed. In the ensuing trial, the former blamed her behavior on the sedative, usually used to treat insomnia. In addition to jail time, she'd be placed on 5 years probation and have to perform 180 hours of community service, as well as register as a sex offender. Number 3. Oscar Rodriguez. On January the 27th of 2014, Luis Carlos Morin Jr. was fatally shot outside his home in Coachella, California, by Riverside County Sheriff's Deputy Oscar Rodriguez. He'd gone to the residence to arrest Morin on outstanding felony warrants when an altercation reportedly occurred, resulting in Rodriguez having to use his service weapon. In 2015, he was officially cleared of any charges related to the shooting, as it was deemed his actions had been justified. Not long after that, a civil suit was launched by Morin's family against Riverside County. It came with a shocking revelation on a matter that had been overlooked by the initial investigation. The deputy and Diana Perez, a woman with whom Morin had 2 children, had been having an affair in the time period leading up to the shooting. Their last intimate encounter had occurred roughly 6 weeks before the victim was shot. The suit alleged that Perez had broken off the affair and that Rodriguez executed Morin out of jealous rage. The deputy resigned from the sheriff's office in 2016 as the love triangle revelation had prompted a murder investigation. Evidence suggested that on the night of the killing, Rodriguez had hid in the bushes near the victim's home and ambushed him as he returned from a family event. He kicked him in the back of the knee, pinned him to the ground, and fired a round into his back. Rodriguez didn't call for an ambulance until backup arrived at the scene. Text messages, phone records, and statements indicated that he'd been pressing Perez for months about Morin's whereabouts. She sent him a text message with a map indicating Morin's location on the night of the shooting. In the aftermath, Rodriguez was charged with murder and Perez with being an accessory, facing life in prison and up to 3 years, respectively, if found guilty. The civil lawsuit against Riverside was settled with Morin's family for nearly $7 million, which represented one of the most substantial payouts in the county's history. Today's topic was inspired by the Sneaker Guru 23, Cohen MC Gamer, and Kim Clark. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Richard Barrios. In April of 2020 in California, a Ventura County Sheriff's deputy was arrested and charged with destroying evidence as well as filing a false report in relation to an arrest he'd made a year prior. 27-year-old Richard Barrios of Camarillo had taken into custody a woman he'd suspected of being under the influence of an illegal substance. The incident occurred on November the 12th of 2019. Barrios asked the woman to provide a urine sample, which she did, and it came back negative. Afterwards, The deputy threw the sample away and also wrote in his report that she'd failed to provide it. He's yet to have offered a reason for his actions, which would have resulted in the incarceration of an innocent person. Fortunately, another deputy tested a woman a few hours later, and she was released. Richard Barrios was investigated on the basis of an internal complaint. His trial was delayed due to the pandemic. However, based on the charges leveled against him, Barrios risked a maximum sentence of 5 years and 8 months in a state prison. Number 1. Michelle Gilbert. Starting in 2011, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Deputy Michelle Gilbert became a central figure in a corruption investigation that led to multiple arrests within the department where he worked. The investigation was spearheaded by the FBI. Gilbert unwittingly accepted a bribe of $1,500 from an undercover agent to smuggle a cell phone to an inmate. Once he was within their custody, the FBI had planned to use him as a pawn in Operation Blue Line. The Bureau would have rented a warehouse and spread the word that it was housing copious amounts of drugs. Gilbert, secretly working as an informant for the Bureau, was meant to recruit other corrupt deputies to moonlight as guards. Once they were enrolled in the fictitious drug enterprise, the FBI would have used them to gain information about abuses in the county's jails. 2 days after it had been given the green light, Operation Blue Line came to a crashing halt as the Sheriff's Department discovered the phone and traced it back to the Bureau. What followed was a deliberate attempt by the department, its deputies, and commanding officer to frustrate the FBI's investigation in a desperate bid for self-preservation. At least 21 of them were subsequently convicted of obstruction of justice, including Sheriff Lee Backer, who eventually pled guilty to lying to federal authorities. Gilbert cut a deal with prosecutors in 2012 and agreed to cooperate with the FBI. In a series of interviews conducted in the years that followed, he revealed the horrific abuses that inmates had suffered at the hands of the county's deputies. He reported that they would sometimes squeeze inmates' fingers until they flinched, only to accuse them of starting an altercation and beat them. Cruelty was reportedly encouraged, as if one of the deputies treated an inmate humanely, the others would refer to him or her as Deputy Love and ostracize them. Gilbert himself partook in the violence on multiple occasions, accompanied by at least 5 others of the sheriff's employees. He would routinely brutalize inmates on the 3rd floor of the men's central jail. The deputies would then get their stories straight and falsify reports to cover up the beatings. Even if an inmate attempted to officially complain, their reports went nowhere, since they were also processed by the deputies. As part of his plea deal, Gilbert wasn't charged for using excessive force, but only bribery, for which in 2016 he was sentenced to 6 months in a federal prison. Thanks for watching. If you were a deputy and found out that your parents were running an illegal scheme, would you report or protect them? Let us know in the comments section below.